For the last couple of years, my son has been a part of a mountain biking club, which is really great for me. It's great for him too, but it's been really great for me. It's been great for me for a number of reasons. First of all, bikes are awesome, and I love bikes a lot. But in addition to that, it's the first time I've ever been able to participate with one of my kids in the thing that they like doing. My oldest daughter is into dance, and that should be illegal for me to participate in. My middle daughter is an elite gymnast, and I would be immediately hospitalized if I tried any of that. My other middle daughter is into theater and acting, and that's great, but I think that takes a particular skill set that I do not have, and there's nothing that I could do to really participate in that. I can watch these things, I can cheer them on, I can be there for them, but I can't really do these things with them. But my son is on a mountain biking team, and I can go and ride bikes with my son because I can ride a bike, and that's one thing that I can do. And so I go with him to ride, and there's a couple of things that the coaches teach them that I really appreciate, some mantras that I've found to be very helpful for myself. And one of them is whenever they're approaching a climb, the coaches will yell back to the kids, "It's time to embrace the suck." And the kids go, "Embrace the suck," and they just power through the climb. And they know on the other side is going to be this great downhill, and they're going to be rewarded for all the work that they did. But in the meantime, they embrace the suck. And last Sunday, the reason why I wasn't here is because I was riding my bike from Aspen to Crested Butte, and this particular mountain bike race that I was a part of starts in the town of Aspen, and you climb immediately to the top of Aspen Mountain, which is about 4,000 feet above the town. And you do this over about 5 miles, and that's a lot of vertical gain over a pretty short distance on a bike, and it's hard, and it's not very fun. And everybody is suffering together on this first part of the race. And everybody kind of spreads out, throughout, and eventually you're kind of alone. But at the very beginning, you're with this pack of people who are just surviving together. And it's not pretty. And some people, when they're working really hard on a bike or running or something like that, they get really chatty. Okay, this is like they're nervous or they're not sure how the day is going to unfold or whatever, and they want to chat it up with the people next to them. I am not one of those people. When I am breathing that hard and working that hard, I'm in the pain cave, and I don't really want to talk too much. I kind of just want to stick it out, and I want to focus on my goal and get it done. And in this particular race, there were a couple people who were next to me who wanted to chat it up, and they wanted to ask questions, and they wanted to had some nervous energy, whatever, in between, breaths, like desperately trying to get oxygen into their lungs. They're chatting it up. And at one point, I turned to one of the people who was talking to me, and I said, "Hey, man, I'm embracing the suck right now. I can't talk to you." And he went and found somebody else to talk to, but he didn't talk to me anymore. And I used this great mantra about embracing the suck. And in this story that we're in right now, that Maggie introduced last week, we are about to see the main characters of the story embrace the suck. They're about to experience an uphill battle. They're about to experience opposition that they had not experienced before. They're about to experience some real trouble, and they're going to have to embrace the suck. If you were here last week, or if you caught it on the podcast, Maggie introduced our Ezra and Nehemiah series. I'm going to do a very quick recap of Ezra chapters 1 through 3, and then I'm going to launch into chapters 4 through 6. We have a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I can. The Israelites, as you may have known, were at one time in captivity in Babylon under the rule of King Nebuchadnezzar. They were enslaved in a way in that time, and they were dispersed over the entire land, and they were meant to assimilate to the culture of the Babylonian people. This is where we get like the book of Daniel, for instance, and we learn a lot about what was happening during that time through that book. Well, at some point, the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar came to an end, and a new king took over, and they were released from captivity. And upon their release from captivity, they are allowed to go back to the land that was promised to them, to the city of Jerusalem, and they are allowed to re-inhabit it and then rebuild their temple, which was the kind of core and crux of their faith, was this physical location where the presence of God dwelt and where they were meant to go and do all of their worship, but also lots of commerce and lots of other activity took place kind of with that as the central hub of the city. The temple was extremely important, and we taught a series a couple of months ago about the temple, and we talked about the significance of it, also the synagogue and a few other holy sites as well. Well, in this particular story, the people of God, they exit their captivity captivity, and they enter the city of Jerusalem, and they begin to build this temple, and this is a really big deal. And they have the blessing of the king. The king at the time had issued a decree, King Cyrus. He said they should be allowed to do this, stay out of their way, let them do what they want to do. And so they get started. Well, chapters 4 through 6 is a story of opposition. It's a story of them no longer having this clear path to rebuilding the temple that they wanted to build. And it plays out through a series of letters. And I'm going to recap the story with excerpts from those letters, these letters that were exchanged, and make a little bit of commentary as we go, okay? So it's unique, and these three chapters are unique in that they play out like letters exchanged back and forth, and I find that really interesting. Chapter 4 begins with a real slimy bunch who want a piece of the glory of this massive architectural endeavor to rebuild the temple. It's a little bit unclear as to what they really are after. Do they just want to be a part of something that's really big and permanent and physical and like it looks really cool and they just want to be a part of that? Is it because they are kind of traditional pagans of the area and they're sort of collecting favor from various gods? That was sort of a common practice. Like if I can get favor with every god kind of in the region, then I just have favor with the entire pantheon of gods. There's a lot of things that they could have been trying after, but they were trying to get some piece of the pie. And so they go to the Israelites and they say, let us be a part of this thing. The Israelites immediately sense their inauthenticity, their self-aggrandization, and their insensitivity to the significance of the project, and they say, no, thank you. And these folks rejected, these Samaritans, as they are called, kind of as a general catch-all term, who are trying to get a piece of the pie. They go to the king of the time and they say, you probably need to put a stop to this. Now, the king of the time was a person named Artaxerxes, okay? And they go and they write a letter to the king. Obviously, this king was not nearby, but they decide to write a letter. And here's an excerpt from the letter in Ezra chapter 4, from these people to King Artaxerxes. And it says this: they are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now, be it known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and the wall is finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll, tax, and the royal revenue will be impaired. And now, because we eat the salt of the palace, and it is not fitting for us to witness the king's dishonor. Therefore, we send and inform the king in order that a search may be made in the book of records of our fathers. You will find in the book of records and learn that this city is rebellious and hurtful to kings and provinces, and that sedition was stirred up in it from of old. That was why the city was laid waste. We make known to the king that if this city is rebuilt, its walls finished, you will then have no possession in the province beyond the river. So the Artaxerxes receives this letter and says, hey, go back in history. Do your own research, Artaxerxes, and look back. And while you're doing it, make sure you have this very specific lens that these are terrible people. Make sure you read the history books, but do it with a very specific bias that these people will not pay taxes. These people will only cause ruin to your rule and to your oversight. Artaxerxes writes them back and says, yeah, I don't like that. Stop them immediately. That's the gist of the letter. There's a lot more. But essentially, I don't like that at all. I want to be in charge. I want to be the most important, and I want to collect as much as I possibly can from all of my citizens. You should definitely put a stop to this. You're right. I did look back in the history books, and I did find exactly what I was looking for, which is that these are rebellious people who only cause trouble and problems for me. And so he writes back, and they are supposed to stop construction immediately, and they do. All of a sudden, the Israelites, who had this path to success, had this path to carrying out the will of God, had this path to actually accomplishing what God had called them to do, all of a sudden they're met with this roadblock and they have to stop construction immediately. And the house of God, as it is referred to many times throughout this book, is only half built. It is in ruins, essentially. It is useless to them. And so they just go about living their lives and trying to figure out how to live their life without this centerpiece, this thing that is central to who they are, being in existence. And at the beginning of chapter 5, two prophets show up on the scene, a prophet named Haggai and a prophet named Zechariah. And they prophesy to the people of God, and they get like one line that's like a mention. Hey, these guys showed up and said some stuff, and right after they say some stuff, the Israelites start construction again. So all of a sudden, the Israelites this letter from Artaxerxes is so serious and so important that they are willing to stop everything. But then this prophecy is so significant, they start construction again. Well, you might be wondering, what in the world did they say in order to get them to start construction again in disobedience to the king? Well, you are in luck. There are 2 books in the Old Testament, one named after each of these prophets, and your homework is to read those on your own time at some point, because we don't have time to unpack them right now. But we know exactly what these prophets said to the people of God. We know exactly what they said because it's recorded in these prophetic books, and I really do think you should read them. They're not long. You can definitely do this. I know it. But here's the gist of what they say. God says, you're working on your own houses while mine is in ruins. You're following this dangerous road of your ancestors that ended them up in captivity. When I command you to do something, even when there is opposition, even when it sucks, follow through with what I have commanded you to do. This is the gist of these prophets and what they say. These 2 prophets show up and they say, hey, if you look back in your history, kind of the way Artaxerxes just did, you will see a pattern of your people. You will see a pattern of your ancestors disobeying the will of God and not following through with what God wanted you to do. And then the result is you are in disobedience and you end up in either captivity or in famine or other bad things happen. So don't do that. I don't recommend it. And so they start construction again. And when they started to rebuild again, the governor of that province pays notice and goes, whoa, you guys are doing something in direct opposition to what the king had told you. But at this time, we have a different governor. We have a different accuser. It's no longer the people that were accusing back when the original accusation took place. And we have a different king in place. And so the governor says, hey, I need a list of your names. I need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And they go, great, here are our names, and we're doing this because God told us to. Is that enough? Great. And then he writes a letter to the king at that time. This king, this particular king, no longer King Artaxerxes, is the king Darius. And in this letter, in Ezra chapter 5, it says this. Therefore, if it seems good to the king, let a search be made in the royal archives there in Babylon to see whether a decree was issued by Cyrus the king for the rebuilding of the house of God in Jerusalem, and let the king send us his pleasure in the matter. So a new governor makes a new accusation and a new recommendation to a new king. This recommendation isn't look back at the history with a very narrow lens at how horrible this particular people group are. Rather, look back and see, did they actually have a pathway for this legally? Did the king at one time, King Cyrus, to actually give them the pathway to do this? Go back and look. Well, Darius does this, or commands some people to do it. Probably didn't do it himself, but commands some archivists to go and look, and then comes back and then writes this letter in Ezra chapter 6 to the Israelites and to that governor. Let the work on the house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews rebuild the house of God on its site. Moreover, I make a decree regarding that you shall do for these elders of the Jews for the rebuilding of this house of God. The cost is to be paid to these men in full and without delay from the royal revenue, the tribute of the province from beyond the river, and whatever is needed, bulls or rams or sheep or burnt offerings to the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, or oil, and the priests at Jerusalem as the priests at Jerusalem require. Let that be given to them day by day without fail, that they may offer pleasing sacrifices to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and his sons. Also, I make a decree that if anyone alters this edict, a beam shall be pulled out of his house, and he shall be impaled on it, and his house shall be made a dunghill. Calm down, Darius. Whoa. May the God who caused his name to dwell there overthrow any king or people who shall put out a hand again to alter this or to destroy this house of God that is in Jerusalem. Darius, make this decree. Let it be done with all diligence. The people of God are able to continue their construction of the temple, but not just in any sort of way. They're not just barriers have been removed. It has now been made illegal, punishment upon a horrible version of death to get in their way, and everything is to be paid for. And Darius has a distinct knowledge and understanding of what their worship looks like and says all of the things for their worship to be carried out should be supplied for them. They should be paid for their work from the royal revenue. They should have everything that they need in order to continue their worship in full, and everybody should stay out of their way. There certainly should not be any opposition whatsoever. Now, the story has a happy ending. And what's kind of typical throughout Old Testament stories is that a lot of time is covered in very short few words. But a lot of time is covered, and a lot of kings come and go during this time. In fact, there are several kings that aren't mentioned here that were probably in rulership during this time, and there's even some discrepancy in the historic record of the kings and the biblical record of the kings. That doesn't make the Bible untrue. I just wanted to note that there is some discrepancy if you're like into history and you've looked this up or whatever. We don't have time to reconcile the discrepancy right now, but there is kind of a lot of time and a lot of leadership and a lot of convoluted things that pass during this time. And yet, very simply, we have this situation where a king releases the people of God to go and rebuild their temple. Then there's a king who opposes them in their work. And then there's a king who not only reinstates the original decree, but greases the skids and gives them everything that they need to do in order to make this happen. Now, at first glance, when we read this story, the thing that pops out to me and probably pops out to you as well is the faithfulness of the people of God. They've learned from their ancestors, they've learned from their past mistakes, and they go, oh, that's right. For just a minute there, we were unfaithful and we did not follow through with what God told us to do, and then we realized it because we listened to our prophets as opposed to our ancestors who didn't listen to their prophets, and we carried out the thing we were supposed to. And so this could very easily be a homily about what it looks like to be faithful to the call of God on your life. It could be very easily be a homily where we explore what God has asked of each of us, and we then pursue it and follow through with it in obedience. And I think that that is definitely a thing that we can draw from this. But the thing that I cannot get past, and the thing that has obsessed my mind over the last week or so as I've been contemplating this, is these kings. These kings, because my first thought as I was reading this story is Cyrus and Darius must have been God-fearing Jews. I mean, why else would they give these people everything that they needed in order to rebuild this temple? Why would Darius give them not only that, but also payment and everything they needed to specifically carry out their worship in the very particular way? In that time, if they weren't God-fearing Jews, then this religious group would have been considered a threat, most likely. And so they had to have been Jews, right? Actually, no. Cyrus and Darius were most likely of some kind of religious order that historians refer to as Zoroastrianism, which I hadn't even really ever heard of until I started looking this up. It's a monotheistic religion that explored the tension between good and evil and the tension between the sovereignty of God and the free will of humanity, which has some similarities to Judaism. So they could have seen that as like, oh, we're kind of similar. We have something in common. But like I said, in that time, it was far more likely that they would have seen a similar religious group as a threat to their religious order and therefore wiped them out. Genocide was like the solution at that time for dealing with people who were different than you. That was essentially what any government or any army or any people group was after, was we need to make sure, if I don't like this particular way that this particular people cook their food, if I get rid of that people, then I don't have to worry about that anymore. If this particular people speak a language or practice a religion or something like that I don't like very much, the best way for me to get rid of that or to deal with that is to overpower them and to get rid of them. This was a very common practice. And it would have been very easy for Cyrus and for Darius and for these other kings to follow in the footsteps of Nebuchadnezzar and create not only so much opposition that they couldn't carry out the will of God, but to actually do something to eliminate the Jews. And yet they don't. In fact, they do the opposite. And it leaves me asking why. Why did these kings do this? And I think it's a simple answer, but I think it really matters for them then and for us now. God often works through people that we least expect. And God often works through people that don't have the same ideological or belief system that you do. God is doing all kinds of things in the world, all kinds of things in your life, and here in Inglewood and well beyond here. And God isn't always using people who go to church on Sundays to carry those things out. God isn't always using people that profess faith in Jesus in order to carry those things out. God oftentimes uses people that are not ideologically aligned with us to carry out the will of God. And I think that oftentimes we find ourselves far too tribalistic, and then we fall prey to this belief that we are the only ones who can carry out the will of God, rather than looking for partnership all around us. God is doing all kinds of things to carry out the will and the plan and the vision and the mission of God, and we have cut out a huge portion of the population that God is using because we're looking for some sort of ideological alignment instead of a values alignment. These kings had a values alignment with the people of God. They didn't necessarily have an ideological alignment. They didn't have a belief alignment, but they had a values alignment. And when I think about our work as a church, particularly a parish church that exists to take spiritual and social responsibility of this city, a church that exists to care for our neighbors, to understand our neighbors, to meet the needs of our neighbors, when I think about that, I think about all the times throughout our short history as a church, God has raised up someone or an organization or a business that does not have the same ideological beliefs as us, to come alongside us to accomplish the will and work of God because there's a values alignment. It is popular among Christians to sort of assume that like anybody in any sort of position of power must be corrupt, right? Anybody in government, anybody elected or appointed in government or whatever, they must be corrupt. They're taking money under the table. They're in it for the power and the glory, whatever. Some of our local government people have been our strongest allies, and it isn't because we believe the same thing. Sometimes the people in our government have been our strongest allies in carrying out the will and the work of God here in Inglewood and beyond that, not because there's been an ideological alignment, but because there's been a values alignment, and God has used them to resource us to carry out that will. I think maybe the best example of that, or the one that's the easiest one to pin this on, is the Inglewood Holiday Store that we participate in every single year. You're probably familiar with it if you've been around for any length of time. But we serve 200 families in the city, which represent over 700 kids in our district. And our biggest partners are the Inglewood School District, which is decidedly non-religious, the Inglewood City Government, which is decidedly non-religious, and many businesses and organizations which are decidedly non-religious. And they come alongside us and they say, hey, you know how you worship your God by taking care of people who are vulnerable in your community? We're going to make sure you have everything you need in order to carry out that form of worship. We're going to make sure you have all of the stuff. I mean, in this story, it's goats and rams and stuff, but in our story, it's gifts, Christmas gifts for kids. It's money to carry this thing out, to pull it off. It's pastries. I mean, it's like a bunch of things that are not on this list, but it is the way that we go about our worship by caring for vulnerable people in our community. And there is a boatload of non-believers or non-Christians or whatever you want to call them who come alongside us and say, we're going to resource the heck out of you to do it. And I wonder who that coworker is or that neighbor is in your life or that family member who maybe doesn't align with you ideologically, but who cares about the same things that you do. And God might be using that person or ready to use that person in your life, but you haven't thought about partnering with them because they're not a Christian. How often do we overlook and miss what God is doing and who God is using because we're looking for somebody who believes the same thing that we do? And so my hope is that you would consider these people in your life and wonder, maybe for a moment, pause and consider, who is it that God is using in your life or ready to use in your life if you would just have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Because for generations, God has been using people that don't think the same way that we do or same way that the Jews did in order to carry out the will and the purpose of God. Let's pray. God, thank you for some time together in the scriptures. We pray, God, that these stories would remind us of who you are and what you're doing. May we consider them as precedent for the way that we are to engage the world around us. Although they are ancient stories, they have plenty of modern-day implications, and I pray, God, that we would be aware of those and consider those for our lives. We love you. We pray these things in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.